Well, hey, good morning, YouTube. Petey Two Finger here. This video might be helpful to some people. If you're not a tinkerer or this video, I gotta start by saying it's not for everyone. Okay, so here is my Fernandez guitar that has a sustainiac system. So that means when you play with these switches, it engages a system that makes the strings sing. So it's infinite sustain. Okay. So this guitar requires 9 volts. The pickups are active pickups. Plus, when you engage the sustainiac, and it's got a transducer that makes the strings infinite sustain, that uses a lot of current, which means how it's designed is you have a 9-volt battery that lives in here. So you pop this open and a 9-volt pops in there, and that 9-volt battery will give you about 30 minutes of continuous sustainer use, and then it's not going to sustain so much. The guitar will still operate, the active pickups will go for a long time after that, but you need a fully charged 9-volt battery to be able to automatically wiggle these strings. You're moving mass. So you can't have a half charged 9-volt battery. You need a full 9-volt battery, or a bigger power source would be the solution for this. So here you can see we have this is the 1/4 inch input, and then what's that guy there? Well, that is a 2.1 millimeter jack. So my guitar strap has a battery pack in it. And that battery pack lives in this section of the strap here. There's also a fuse for that. So this plugs in here, and then that's how I get my sustainiac power. So I don't run 9-volt batteries in my sustainiac. Maybe when I got it, I popped one in there for the first few days. I had a 9-volt battery in there, but this is the power pack that it's a nickel metal hydride NIHM power pack, and then this is one of the chargers. There's an extra cable taped on here that we're going to ignore that extra cable. Something else I was charging, another amp with a battery pack. So here's how I charge the battery up. It's a remote control Tyco 9.6 volt mini charger, and I went ahead and cut in a female DC 2.1 mil. So this strap here, when I'm going to charge my battery, I'll go ahead and plug this in here, and then plug this into the wall, and it charges up the system. So I bought this guitar used, and it came pre-reliced. So it wasn't really a big concern to me that I was going to drill this hole. See, there's a port in here. There's a bay in here. You can see how I would drill that and be able to, basically what I did was, this door opens up here and there's a 9-volt snap. I took a 9-volt snap, connected it onto there, and then ran that extension wire, down onto this jack. I could have put the fuse in here, internally fused it. I didn't. I went with an external fuse because I've always read about keeping the fuse really close to the actual battery. Like if you're gonna run a power wire for an amp on a car, they recommend you put the fuse right near the battery where the load is going to become greatest. If there is a short, it will become greatest very near where the battery is, and so that's where you need to put the fuse, and to make sure that that fuse pops. So another way you could do this, let's say you want to keep your guitar more stock. Well, what you could do is you could have your strap, instead of terminating in this more familiar, this 2.1 millimeter DC connector is what we use for guitar pedals. You could have this strap terminate in a battery connector. So basically, that battery connector wire, you would strap your strap here, connect it onto the strap post, and then that wire would travel this way, and maybe you would have to, on this door, you would have to cut a section out of this door for the wire to go through that. But yeah, if you had a battery snap, that could just kind of sneak right in here and connect up inside of here. So every time you take your strap off, you would be opening this panel. You could have a pigtail coming out of here with a pair of DC, like 2.1 mil female and male. You could have a pigtail coming out like that, and then use the same standard 2.1 mil connector. So coming out of the guitar, there would be a pigtail, and then you would have this on your strap. So there's different ways of doing it, whatever connections, you could run 2 drywall screws into it and wire wrap it. It just depends on what you want to do. But the idea is that the sustainiac, when you're running the sustainiac, you get a half hour on a typical 9-volt, like a Duracell or an Energizer, and then it's lost enough power that it won't sustainiac anymore. It won't vibrate the strings. Now, I've never tested that. Like I said, I paid $2.25 for that guitar. It's got a Floyd and a locking nut. I think it's a Fernandez Revolver, and it was kind of dinged up. I put on some Allen wrench stuff here, and I put this 2 on here because that's my nickname, Petey Two Finger. I suffered a lawnmower accident when I was a kid, and missing the tops of these 2 fingers, so I play with an index and a pinky to fret. So, like I said, I never really ran 9-volt batteries in here. I wanted a sustainiac guitar because I had seen Adrian Belew play one in King Crimson on the live DVD. I was like, that sustainiac is so cool, I gotta get one of those. And so I had kept my eye open. You know what, I'm done with this stuff, honey. And sure enough, there was a sustainiac guitar for $2.25. I went up there. It was a hard shell case. The guy had a Marshall half stack in his kitchen. He was like a gigging guy. Looked like maybe he was the type of guy who kind of was going through guitars, like he was on that. He's a younger guy, and he was like, trying out all kinds of different guitars to find what worked for him. And I said, well, why is it so cheap? And he said, well, I just need to move it. because I really thought something must have been wrong with that guitar. It turns out that there was a dead spot on the neck, but it's it seemed to have worked its problem out. Like, I'm very happy with the guitar. I've adjusted the neck. That guitar's been through hell. A lot of outdoor stuff being played in the humidity. But the point is, like I said, I have no idea. I was told I think in the actual Fernandez instruction manual, it says that it's a half hour. So before you go angry in the comment section and go, my sustainiac, I run it for hours on the 9-volt battery. That's fantastic. I don't know. I never tried it. Basically, when I bought the guitar, that week, like a few days after I bought it, I went to Goodwill and that battery was there for $1.99, and I bought it. And you say, well, why would you buy a used battery from Goodwill? I used a 9-volt, I used a 12-volt, like a phone charger, and an RCA cable. So I kind of held it together. I had called my wife. She came and we used some RCA cable to connect this 12-volt phone charger that had an LED on it to this 9-volt battery, and the LED lit up on the charger, and that told me that, well, maybe it's not fully charged, but this NIHM battery is holding a charge, which means to me it's good. So we took it home. Sure enough, the NIHM battery, this is 7 years now, so it's still working. That NIHM battery still works. I charge it up to 11.6, like 11.56, 11.6 volts, and then usually we play for a long period of time. It'll go down to about 10.5, and then I recharge it. So it runs a little hot, which is great. The sustainiac on that guitar works great, sounds great. You can hit it with a little bit more voltage than it was designed. A few years back, I started getting nervous. I'm like, man, I have used this pack for so many years, it's gonna die. So I bought another pack. I don't know if it was NIHM. I think it was NIHM. It wasn't lithium. I went for the same thing. And it's a different shape. This one was like lime green colored plastic coating on it, and it seems like it's a bunch of AA sized cells put together to make up this pack. And so that one I built again with a fuse, and that's the secondary one, and we charge those and back them up whether we're using them or not once a year. So yes, I realize I could just get rechargeable 9-volt batteries. I realize I could just go to the dollar store and buy a box case of for $24. I could get the 99-cent. But for us going and playing for 8 or 12 hours live, I think we did a 16-hour run one time. So rather than changing batteries, like I said, I didn't even think of this. I bought the guitar and I was thinking I'm going to have to come up with some way to defeat the 9-volt battery concept, because I don't like that concept. 30 minutes and you've got to replace it. No, I don't like that. Next thing I know, I'm at the Goodwill and here's this 9.6 volt nickel metal hydride battery pack. I got it. I cut the DC ports into the guitar. It worked like a charm. I have blown the fuse a few times and that wire has broken. That wire, the problem is the wire on that battery pack coming off of it going down to that DC 2.1 mil. The standard fuse holder wire, I was getting cheap fuse holders, and that wire is real thin stranded wire that would break. and I would have to replace that wire because of the fuse holder. Eventually, I got a different type of fuse holder wire, which is, I think I put a blade fuse in there because it had a really heavy duty wire on it. And then what'll happen now is the wire at the 90 will break because I use a DC 2.1 mil 90 connection. And I found by ordering pre-wired 90s that are already, they come with a 6-inch lead. One of the brands that I get has a little thicker wire than the other, so I just try to use the one with the thicker wire. So it does have its pitfalls. You know, you've got to be ready. Maybe have a 9-volt battery spare with you. But it's never broken, you know, where it's like ruined the day. So that's one thing to consider if you're going to hardwire this. You're still going to want to have a backup. And I probably should bring up, when I was building amps, I would have a 7809 voltage regulator, which busts down like, let's say 30 or 12 volts to 9 stable DC volts. And those typically you run a couple capacitors on there with a heat sink. So whatever the amp is running off of, let's say the amp's running off 24 volts to 12 volt, like tractor batteries. I would have this 9-volt port on the amp, and then I would run a mic cable, an XLR cable. I would cut that and solder guitar ends on it, like 90s. And then there would be that third wire. I would run the DC 9 volts through the ground and then through the third wire on the XLR. And that would be a little pigtail cable that would come out of where I would have the 1/4-inch connector. So the 1/4-inch connector is a 90, and that's coming out of that is a little 2 or 3-inch wire pigtail with the DC plug. So when I would plug into my amp, about an inch away from the input on the amp would be a panel mount female DC 2.1 millimeter connector I could plug that power jack into. And then on the guitar, of course, an inch away from the 1/4-inch input would be the same thing, female power plug. So on that setup, I found that because you're sharing a common ground on some really high gain patches, when I use this thing called a cord Pandora, I had on the flanger, on the high gain patches that had a flanger, you could hear that clock in the flanger. Other than that, it was pretty quiet. Really didn't have any too much heterodyne interference, but ultimately, really, you don't want to run your amp power supply to have it powering your sustainiac because you may run into a heterodyne issue. So having a separate power supply is always better. Now, for my indoor rig, I had a dedicated solo 9-volt port where nothing else was on that. And we ran that, I have that cable, that 2-in-1 cable. So at home, I don't use that battery pack. I'm using a 9.6 volt adapter, and I'm using another one of those special cables. So on the ground next to my pedal board, I have a 9.6 volts coming up on a 2.1 mil female connector that plugs into the pigtail that runs on the XLR cable that is my guitar cable. So indoors, maybe I'll use that strap, but I just won't plug that wire in. It's just dangling. That's why I fused it. So I know this sounds complicated, but I play, like I say, I play the guitar a lot, and I really didn't want to use the battery when I was indoor at home when I had AC just a couple inches away. It's like, go through this, spend an hour to wire up whatever you need to, and then you're not going to be wasting the battery. So that's how I power my sustainiac. I only really ran into minimal issues with it when I did all-in-one with the high gain flanger patch. I had a little bit of interference. Other than that, it's always been dead silent, no noise issues. And to be able to not worry about stocking 9-volt batteries was made it all worth it for me. And I'm guessing if you look back on this channel, you're going to find another video that's probably much more in detail on this. But I was talking about it today, and I thought I would update the video because to me it's a really cool mod, and I don't think other people have done it so much. So that's my sustainiac mod. You could do this for a active guitar as well, but to be honest, active pickups last so long, I would say it wouldn't really make sense. If you've got a guitar that has active pickups, just run store-bought 9-volt batteries on there because they're going to last you a year. And considering that the wires wear out on this, that you have breakage from that, it's a guitar, it's moving, you know, it would make more sense to just run the 9-volt battery. All right, you guys, I hope that was helpful. And again, if you have a sustainiac and you run an Energizer battery and you get hours out of it, that's fantastic. I don't know. I never did that. I was told, I read from the manufacturer, you get a half hour out of a 9-volt battery when it comes to a sustainer. And that to me was bad math. That made it worth it to, considering the instrument that I bought was already relicked and beaten and banged up and had chips and paint missing on it. It had already been relicked, that it was okay to drill a little hole in it to make a DC port. I hope that makes sense. And peace. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. That's what I'm supposed to think.